This is Beanfield Siding from Sheepscot Scale Models. It was released in 1993 and the original price was $160. You can typically find this kit on eBay in the $200 to $300 range. George Barrett is the man behind Sheepscot Scale Models, and he was based out of Maine. They had some building kits and then also some other just basic parts and accessories, and those have been acquired by Gandy Dancer Hobbies and apparently are still available. Of course, the kits are long out of production. I'll be honest, this is the second time I have filmed the unboxing of this kit. The first time I took a look at the contents and I decided I was just not in the mood to deal with this, and I boxed everything back up and put it away for a while. So now I'm ready to tackle it and I have some idea of what I'm getting into, so I've sort of mentally prepared for this thing. This kit is really a beast. It is basically a scratch build. You have a lot of just diagrams, or not even a lot of diagrams. You have diagrams and then a lot of sticks and very few instructions, which for me is kind of fine because I tend to ignore the instructions anyway. And then you're really kind of left to your own to just build however you see fit based on what you have. The kit has several buildings. The big main building is called the Ice House. There is also an office, a loading dock, and a shed they call the milk shed. And then there was also an outhouse, which I didn't build. Then there are some other structures. There is the icing platform, and also like a diesel gas tank and a few other accessories. The kit was missing some parts, some of which seemed like they might have been important. There was a lot of wood, but there was one size of wood that I really did run out of. So if you're going to build this kit, you want to make sure you have a lot of extra wood of various sizes. Also, I don't think the kit came with enough windows. They're kind of loose on how you put the windows on the buildings. But I did run out of windows. I ended up borrowing some windows and doors from some old fine scale miniatures kits. A lot of the doors you just scratch build on your own. If you've ever thought about scratch building something like this, or getting into scratch building buildings, this is a really good video to watch because you're going to see a lot of techniques that are sort of unusual. He was really creative in coming up with techniques. Some are good, some are not so good. So it's kind of interesting to see his unique take on some of these things. If you want to get into scratch building, I kind of recommend getting one of these kits and giving it a shot because it's basically a scratch build, but he already did the diagrams for you. Due to the nature of this kit and some of the weird structures, I'm going to do some different painting techniques than what I've done in some past videos. So if you're looking for something different, then you'll want to check this out. This kit was pretty difficult to build and was missing some pieces, but still it is a really interesting kit and has a lot of character, and that's why I bought it, and I'm pretty glad I went through the effort. The kit included a price list and newsletter from 1993, so I'm including that in the video, and you can pause the video if you want to read those. Well, having done these buildings for a while now, I'm finally getting smart, and the first thing I'm doing is sorting all of the wood by size, and I'm going to color code the ends based on the size. And it turns out that this was actually really helpful. I ended up building the buildings a little bit out of order. The first one that I'm going to start with is the large building, which they call the Ice House. The first step in construction is to build the foundation using these 12 by 12 squares, and there's two layers. This is a bottom layer apparently, and this is a top layer. These templates are used to build walls, and you cut them out and then you cover them with sticks, wood sticks, either planking or planking and studs. So some of the walls have exposed studs and others don't. And then I believe you're going to have to cut some walls out of these pieces. The foundation is 2 layers of wood high, and then you're supposed to paint it to look like concrete. So I'm assembling the foundation here over the diagram. I labeled each of the wall pieces with what kind of wall they're supposed to get, like what kind of wood you're supposed to put on, either studs or boards. And now I'm just gluing on those wall pieces. This is a little bit tedious, but it's pretty simple so far. You just want to make sure you keep everything straight. For me, one of the hard parts of this kit is cutting the clapboard walls into the correct size and adding the windows. The last time I tried to do this on a different kit, I had a lot of trouble with it. It's pretty difficult to really get the walls as square as they need to be. But this wood did actually cut pretty easily as long as you had a fresh blade. Cutting out the doors and windows is a little more difficult, and cutting these angles for the roofing is a little bit difficult, trying to get those just exactly right. This kit will give you some practice in covering up your mistakes for sure. Here's one of the things that's always difficult about trying to cut off of a plan drawing. So look at this tower section. The height of the tower, you would think it goes from here to this line. But this is actually a board that goes over the wall. So the wall actually goes from here up to this top line. If you were to cut it here at the lower line, your tower will come up a little bit short. Yeah, that certainly is not going to be the last time I have that problem trying to build off of these diagrams. He doesn't really give you any diagrams of sub-assemblies. So here I am on one of the walls adding the external studs. This is kind of a nice feature. It gives a really interesting look to the walls. I haven't seen this on any of the other buildings I've built, I don't think. So as I said, you're supposed to make the base look like concrete, and one of the ways that I like to make wood look a little more like concrete, at least in terms of the texture, is to cover it with some wood filler and try and get rid of the grain. And in this case, there's some seams where the wood pieces are joined, so I want to cover those up, kind of make it look like a solid piece of cast concrete. I think this helped, but in the end, this base was not really very visible. Well, everything's pretty messy at this point. So I'm trying to assemble these walls together where you have the studs on the bottom and just the plank walls on the top. And I can't figure out whether it's supposed to be flush with the outside of the planks or the inside of the planks. Like the cards are supposed to be flush. And I think it's supposed to be this way. It looks better this way. But you can't really tell from the pictures. The problem is that now these two walls go together. So you have to have a cutout here to allow those two to fit like that. But this card was too long. So the pieces don't really fit together. So you got to do a lot of cutting and stuff to make things fit. And I had put some bracing here on the sides that got in the way of everything. So I kind of miscalculated the bracing. So I had to cut those off. Which is a little harder to do on cardboard than it is on wood, but that's how that's going to fit together. In these corners, there were supposed to be sticks that stuck up and you attached the walls to the sticks, but they interfered with my bracing, so I decided to just kind of do it a different way. And so I got these three walls on, a little bit of gap here and here, there's a kind of a big one there. But I think I can fill those in with some extra boards. And then the next piece to go in will be here. And it looks like this piece is supposed to have 4x4s on each side. If you look at the diagram, it kind of looks like there's a 4x4 on each side. But I'm not sure that that fits. Well, maybe it does. It's hard to know. Well, so it's pretty tough to get the walls to fit just right. Then the tower goes here, and hopefully that will fit. The kit includes some paper that you're supposed to cut into strips for tar paper roofing. And I just decided to use roofing that I got from Builders and Scale because I like the texture of it. I think it looks pretty good. So I'm using that instead. And I'm attaching it here using spray adhesive on the cards. I actually did run out of this stuff on this kit, and so later on I just used black construction paper, and I think it looks just as good. And it's certainly a lot cheaper. Here's another example of the challenge of trying to work off just a drawing. This piece goes here, and it is the correct size. I'm working on the tower. Here's the tower part, and if you go here, look at this section, match it up, it is the correct size. This distance here is correct. And if you look at this section, it is the correct size. This distance here is correct. But that does not match up. There's a giant gap here of about 3/8 of an inch. So why is that? It's because when you look here, part of this wall is hidden by that roof there. So I'm only looking at the visible part of the wall. I didn't account for the fact that part of the wall is not visible. So when you put it on the building, there's a gap like that. So I got to fill that in. So that's part of the problem of not having actual like sub-assembly diagrams. Now I'm building something called the ice ramp, which is a ramp that goes from the ground up to one of the high doors in the ice house. And this is a fairly tedious build and kind of difficult, and it's not really going to look all that good once it's done. But it's a really interesting part of the structure. So one of the challenging parts is connecting all of the vertical supports once you have built them. Getting them to the correct height is challenging. So what I did is I used some blue tack and kind of stuck it onto the diagram as a temporary mount. And now I am putting together the strips that are going to form the ramp part, and that will hold the vertical sections together. So I did a group of tall supports, and now I'm adding in the group of short supports, and I'm using the blue tack to hold them in place as I add in the horizontal supports that connect the two sections. Now I have to build some stairs, and you have these stringers that they give you, and the trick is to hold them in place as you add the steps, or I guess they're called the treads. I think that someone manufactures a sort of a template that you can put the stringers in that makes this a lot easier. And I think I might have bought one, but I couldn't find it, and so I'm doing it this way. Now I'm moving on to the building that they call the loading dock, and this is a really interesting structure with some interesting construction techniques. So they give you this piece of laminated plywood. It's actually two pieces laminated together, and you'll see the underside here in a second. And what I am doing is marking some horizontal lines because this is going to be the floor and it gets covered with boards, and use these lines to kind of keep the board straight. Here is the bottom of the plywood. You can see the other side, and it actually came with these two pieces of plywood laminated together, and I'm marking out the positions for the support footings. Here I'm adding some trim pieces around the edge. So now I'm gluing the boards onto the plywood. So in the end, you're not really going to see any aspect of this plywood base. I made a mistake here. I glued these 8x8s on long way in here, and they're supposed to go horizontal across this way. So trying to carve those out. So my first big mistake of the project. I'm always amazed I don't cut myself with a razor blade whenever I'm ripping these things apart. And now I'm adding the support legs, and this is actually kind of tricky. Even using a chopper, it's very hard to get the legs to exactly the same length and have them sit completely vertical so that when you set this down on something flat, all the legs are touching the ground. So it's going to be a little bit difficult. These are actually the kind of the horizontal supports that sort of fake the look of support beams underneath the floor. Here it says you're supposed to glue a 1.25 by 8 inch block on the underside of the plywood floor. That is this here. However, I can't find that block in the kit, and it's too big for me to have misplaced really. And also it's a little bit puzzling. I think that the reason for the block, because he says you're supposed to cut the legs a little bit shorter than the block, is that the building sits on the block and then there's a gap between the legs and your layout, and you cover that up with like foliage or ground cover. In this diagram you can see the block. So here's the plywood with these diagonal lines, and then the block is these dots, and then these are the legs. So it doesn't really matter because I'm just going to put legs around the outside anyway. And you're supposed to paint the block a dark color so it's not visible, so it isn't supposed to be visible anyway. So the challenge, of course, is going to be cutting a whole bunch of legs that are all the exact same height so that they all sit sort of flush. But then you have the same problem of just fill in the gaps with foliage or ground cover. This is a solid piece of wood that is supposed to be the former for the roof. So this is the loading dock, and then there's walls, and then it goes on top. So that's a little bit weird. And I think this comes up later when I build the office, which I actually did out of order. And then also there's supposed to be a similar piece that is this little section that goes with that, but I cannot find that anywhere, and it looks like it's too big for something that I would have lost. There's this bag of parts, which I think is the office. It tells you what's in the bag. So that's two pieces of wood that are missing from the kit. So I'm gonna have to come up with something. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna scratch build something, I guess. This piece of card has the walls for the loading dock, and you cut those out and then you cover those with wood planks, 2x6s, I believe, maybe 1x8s. Not really sure. Not really that important. So apparently this triangle piece of wood is actually the roof support, and you glue these boards onto the side to make up the side. It's got to be kind of expensive for him to have gone and cut all of these wood pieces for however many kits he produced. So the front office part of the loading dock has kind of a lower level loading dock underneath it, and the walls are cardboard covered in boards, and now I'm kind of attaching everything to the floor. So here with the walls in place, I'm going to take a look at how the roof fits. It still just seems odd as a construction technique. I feel like I'm doing something wrong, but this is the best I can figure out. And now we're on to the office building, and this is where it gets even weirder, where you build it out of these blocks. And this is actually the first building you're supposed to build. I did everything out of order, of course. And I think if I'd have followed the instructions, or I think if anyone would have followed the instructions in order, they would have taken a look at how this building is built, and they would have kind of walked away from this kit, because this is kind of bizarre. So anyway, you're supposed to glue these blocks together, and then you cover them with wood, and that is your building. But as you're going to see, there's some difficulties here. It doesn't quite give you the right size roof pieces or the right roof pieces, and I couldn't quite figure out how those things fit together. So this is going to be a problem. This is the office, what they call the office, and the construction is really bizarre. So there's these two pieces which go together like this, and then these are the roof pieces. glue the two blocks together, and then you glue the 3-inch roof section on here. Neither of these are 3 inches. Neither of these are 3 inches. This is 3 inches. So I don't know what goes on there. And then they have this other sort of roof section. And here in the bag, none of those. The only other thing that's a roof section is this one, and it's not 3 inches. So the parts don't match up to the diagram. So I guess you do something like this, and then you build it out with cardboard or something. So this just makes the shape of the roof, and you just do everything else on your own. Maybe this one goes here. That makes more sense. That's very peculiar in design. And then you just glue boards horizontally up the sides, and kind of you fake the windows. The windows and doors are just fake. At this point, I built some roof end pieces out of some of the leftover wood from the walls of the previous kits, and now I'm attaching those in place, and we'll see how this works. So I decided to give up on the office building the way it was intended to be built. I had this wood, this is board and batten walls from Mount Albert scale lumber, and I had this from a previous project, so I decided to build the walls to the size of the diagram using this wood, and actually that worked out pretty well. It wasn't too difficult to cut this wood apart. This thing is just so weird. So I took some leftover clapboard, like these pieces that I had from the ice house building, and I built these triangles to support the roof on the end and support the walls. So what you're supposed to do is put 1x6s along the walls and cut out holes for the windows. So here's the diagram. So we have a couple large windows and some small windows. But these are all the windows I have left that I haven't used yet. So I think I have just 3 small windows, and one of those may be reserved for the ice house building. I'm not sure. But I don't have any large windows. I do have the door. So I'm short windows. So what I've decided to do is take some of this clapboard siding, and I cut out wall sections that are about the same size. These sections here too. I was able to cut out windows and doors, and I have these doors left over from a fine scale miniatures kit. So I feel like I'm cheating, but the kit is just too weird. And then I have this window, fine scale miniatures window. So I'm going to put it in that way, and I'm just going to build this structure out of these sheets of wood. I am kind of curious what this would look like if I tried to build it the way they want in the directions, but I'm probably not going to put the effort into that. We'll see. As I said, the doors and windows came from a fine scale miniatures kit, and you can get just the castings from railroadkits.com, I believe. So you don't have to buy an entire kit if you want. The castings are actually still in production. Here I am just scratch building a sort of a garage door using planks of wood, and this was not too bad. So here you can see a comparison of my version versus the kit version. I just don't see how you could make the kit version work. Unfortunately, on these older kits, there's not really a lot of pictures of the completed kit, and they're in black and white, so you don't really see how he did his build. He kind of leaves it up to you. Now we're on to the icing platform, and this is the structure that I think really makes this kit look the most interesting, and he has a kind of a clever way of building it. This is a template that you use, and this is going to give you consistently sized supports for the icing platform. I glued the template down onto this block of plywood that is provided with the kit. And the block of plywood is really supposed to be, I think, a replacement for a chopper. if you didn't have one, but I have a chopper, so I didn't need it. So I glued the template onto the plywood, and then you attach these wood blocks onto the template that match the size of the shaded areas. And this allows you to build really consistently sized supports for the icing platform. And so this is a pretty clever idea. I think it worked out pretty well. Here, using the template, I've started to build the supports. In his diagram, the icing platform is, I think, 26 inches long, and I think I came close to that, maybe 24 inches, and I used about 24 to 26 supports. And now I'm building the walkway. To keep it a little more interesting and more realistic, I cut the long pieces of wood into shorter pieces because, you wouldn't have that long of a piece of lumber, even back then, in the old days when they had old growth trees to cut down. It gives it a little more character as well. And now I'm adding the vertical supports onto the walkway and using horizontal pieces to connect them and support them. This is a little bit tricky, but I seem to have made it work out pretty well. As I said, this ends up being a really interesting looking structure and adds a lot of character to the kit. I think it's going to be a real challenge to paint it though. So this is having me rethink all of my painting techniques while I'm doing this build. With all the vertical supports in place, now I can add the horizontal supports on the other side of the icing platform. And now I'm adding the diagonal supports. And that's not the end of it. I still have to add the handrails all across the top of the walkway. Now we're on to the water tower, and this is kind of a challenging build. It actually took me 2 different attempts. In the first attempt, I tried to do sort of a top section and a bottom section as the instructions suggested, but that didn't really work out. So now I'm trying to do it all with one section from the bottom all the way up to the tank. So I'm kind of fumbling with the horizontal support, so I got to get that worked out. Yeah, I'm not shy about sharing my mistakes, and I really did have to build the water tower twice. You would think this would not be that difficult, but for some reason it just was not coming together quite as easily as I would have liked. I think I just wasn't waiting for the glue to dry in this particular case. So here's the tank for the water tower, and the first thing you want to do is use a carpenter's square, or whatever that's called, and mark some horizontal lines on the tank so that when you put boards on the tank, you make sure that they're vertical. And now I'm adding the boards to the tank. This is another part that didn't really work out all that well. You're supposed to cut out a piece of paper or something for the roof of the tank and make it into kind of a dome. So you cut a circle and then you cut it like a pie slice out and you fold it up into a dome. So I did that, kind of fiddling with the compass. I haven't used a compass in years, so it didn't quite go all that well. I tried to cut out the circle and I built the dome, and I didn't really like it the way it worked. So I went back and just scratch built a flat roof for the water tank. So here you can see a flat roof that I built, and now my experience with some fine scale miniatures kits comes into play because I think they had a better way of doing this. I drilled some holes in the side and put some brads in the holes, and this is how I'm going to attach the bands that go around the tank that kind of hold it together. So I'm using a piece of thread and I'm wrapping it around the tank and also then wrapping it around the brads, and then I'm going to cover up the brads later so you won't be able to see those. And I'm kind of gluing it in place with either white glue or super glue gel to hold it as I do the wrapping. The trick is to try and get all the bands parallel. I cut off the extra length of the brads, so they're just little nubs, and now I'm going to cover up those little nubs with pieces of board. This makes it look like there's kind of a channel that maybe a pipe runs up. This is kind of a trick that came from a fine scale miniatures kit. This is the building they call the milk shed, and the walls are just cardboard and you glue wood to the cardboard. And now I'm attaching the roof. I made the roof out of cardboard from a cereal box. Here is everything ready for painting. So there's 4 buildings. There's the milk shed, the main ice building, the loading dock, and the office. And then the various sub-assemblies, the water tower, the icing platform, and the ice chute. And then there's a diesel fuel tank. For my painting, I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I normally do. First, I sprayed everything with a primer. And then I airbrushed everything with Vallejo concrete. Now, in most of my other builds, to give a chip paint look, I use a sponge and apply the paint color with a sponge. I do that over top of the wood color. In this case, for the buildings where I'm going to have chip paint, after I apply the Vallejo concrete, I spray everything with a Vallejo chipping fluid. You can also use hairspray for this, but the chipping fluid is a little more tolerant of mistakes. Then over top of the chipping fluid, I'm going to spray the paint color. So here I'm doing the milk shed and the paint color is blue. And then I use a toothbrush dipped in water and I start scraping away the paint. The chipping fluid makes it so that the paint comes off. I've tried this before with hairspray on some previous builds, and this is the first time I've ever actually done it with the chipping fluid, and I think the chipping fluid works a little bit better. Of course, it costs more. Once I'm happy with the chipping result, I dry off the excess water, and then I'm going to spray it with some kind of a sealer like Testra's Dull Coat. I'm doing the same thing for the office building. I painted on the gray raw wood color, and then I painted on the chipping fluid, which is invisible. I let the chipping fluid dry, and now I'm applying the red paint color over the entire building. Once the red paint color is dry, I use a toothbrush dipped in water and I remove the red paint, giving it the chipped look. For the icing platform and the other all wood elements, I started out with a black primer, which is a little bit unusual for me. I usually use gray. Now I am painting on Vallejo concrete with an airbrush. Trying to paint this with a paintbrush would be way too tedious. This is such a large piece with so much surface area, it's actually kind of difficult to paint. For the main building, I started out with Vallejo concrete and then I gave it a wash of Vallejo dark gray wash. Then I applied the chipping fluid and I let that dry, and now I'm painting on the main building color. And then again, I used a toothbrush and some water to remove the paint and give it a chipped look. I was really happy with the results I got on this. I think it was much easier to paint these buildings this way than it was to try and use a sponge because of all of the weird contours on the surface. For the milk shed, I applied corrugated metal roofing that I had left over from some previous projects. I think for the kit this was supposed to get tar paper roofing, but I wanted to do something a little bit different. Here are the stairs for the main building. I painted those with Vallejo concrete using an airbrush, and now I'm applying Vallejo dark gray wash, and then I will dry brush with Vallejo silver gray. This will give it the old wood look that I like to use so much. On the water tower and on the buildings and on some of the other wood parts, I'm applying a slimy grime color from AK Interactive. Here is the roof for the loading dock. I cut out cardboard strips from a cereal box and I covered them with black construction paper to simulate tar paper. Then I sprayed the wood blocks for the roof with spray adhesive, and now I'm attaching the cardboard. I did this because I wanted the roof to kind of stick out over the edges a little bit. I thought it would look a little more realistic. This is the loading dock, and I had just attached the roof to it and I realized a problem. When I was first assembling it, I realized that this plywood was a little bit warped, but I didn't think much of it. But the roof piece is that solid piece of triangular wood, and when I glued it down onto the walls so that it was sealed all around and I clamped it down, this part split off of the base because the base was a little bit warped. And I know that there's no way I'm going to have a glue that's going to be strong enough to hold without a small amount of surface area to glue it back into this position. I don't think that's going to work at all. I might try it, but I just don't think that's going to work. I think it's the resistance there is pretty high. So I was thinking about what am I going to do to fix this, because that gap is, I think, pretty noticeable. And if I can't glue it in, I think what I'm going to do is board up some of this area to make it look like it was patched. And I think it could give a really interesting look to the building to do it that way. Here I'm cutting out the two 5-sided pieces for the roof of the loading dock, and these are just cardboard from a cereal box. Again, I'm just going to cover them with black construction paper. It takes me a couple tries to get the angle just right, but I eventually get a pretty good fit. Here I'm trying to work out the position of the buildings on the layout, and I'm trying to make sure that the cars can pass along the track without hitting any of the buildings. The actual diorama that he had was about 36 inches long, and actually the icing tower is next to the loading dock and runs onto the loading dock, but I didn't have enough space for that, so I kind of had to rejigger everything and build it my own way. I've shown how I do groundwork in a lot of my other videos, so I didn't spend a lot of time on that in this video, but basically I painted on diluted matte Mod Podge, and then I cover in some kind of a sand texture to make the gravel, or a grass texture, and then spray it down with scenic cement. I really wasn't sure where I wanted grass and where I wanted gravel in this particular setting, so I kind of went back and forth a couple times, playing around with the different looks. I really don't like the natural color of the gravel. I think it's a little too evenly covered or too homogeneous. So I like to spray everything down with a couple different shades of brown and even some black using an airbrush. Now I got to run a train through with some 60-foot gondolas, and I'm going to see if it clears all of the buildings. This one looks good. I also ran through with my Norfolk and Western 2664, and it did not clear the icing platform. But that's okay. This is really kind of a siding, and it wasn't meant to run the long locomotives or long freight cars. The roof of the cab just clips the corner of the icing platform. Now it's finally time to start gluing down some buildings, so I start with the main building and the icing conveyor. Now I can glue down the stairs. I had actually built the stairs at slightly the wrong height, so when I realized this, I had to go back and rebuild the upper set of stairs, but that was not really a big deal. The thing that was annoying about that was I built following the diagram, but the diagram has a little bit of an elevation change. The building is not on flat ground, and so the stairs came out short because it was on higher ground. So just another annoyance of the diagrams in this kit. Even though it's not really very visible, one of the things I really hate is when there's a gap between the building and the layout surface. And so in this case, I'm covering it up and hiding it with some bushes. Now I'm gluing in the water tower, and I'm going to run a piece of wire down the center to act as a pipe for the water tower. I'll cut it off at the top and then glue the tank on top. After some further testing running some trains through here, I realized that this building really does not fit here. To have enough clearance, it really needs to be about in this location, and the dock overhangs the ties. So I originally was going to put the building way off to the side, the end over here, and then when I saw this space, I thought it would fit. So one option is I'm going to cut down this deck and make it fit. Another option is just put it somewhere else. The area surrounding this is all pretty empty because I don't know what I'm going to put here yet. So I wasn't going to glue this down anyway. So I'm just going to leave it for now, and I'll come back and revisit it and decide what I want to do, whether I want to keep it here and trim the dock. I think it's probably not possible to replace this track or move this track. These are already pretty tight curves. I don't want to make them any tighter, but I'm about a ½ inch short on space here. So the way it is right now, it only will take about like a F7 diesel and 40-foot box cars or something, but this roof overhang actually is what just clips the like the sunshades and stuff on the locomotives. It's just a little tiny bit too narrow. Long locomotives like SD70s, they won't even get through here because the hand railings and stuff actually hit. Coming in on this curve, it clips there. But that's no big deal. That doesn't bother me. So other than this issue, I'm going to consider this done for the moment, at least for the sake of this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.